Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. So, I'm sure that most of us have enjoyed the experience on getting on board a plane. I know that I really enjoyed it when I was a young kid, but nowadays it's a bit more of a nuisance than anything else. In the old days, I remember in the 1970s, I'm not from that era, but it was classed as one of those very highly sophisticated, glamorous ways to travel. Nowadays, I think people just groan and go, "Oh, I can't stand airports. They just make me annoyed and wound up, and all of those things." And they're very interesting environments at the best of the time. You can sort of, when you go to an airport, you can always be looking around. There's heightened stress. There's people that are just very isolated and things like that. And there's a fantastic amount of observation that you can always make from airports and being on planes. So, throughout time, I've always been just churning out a few ideas on the spot as to how things could be improved. I think the major things with air transportation is that there is a massive governance over it in terms of regulation and safety, and I guess we're talking about very, very big industries like your Boeings and your Airbuses, which haven't really revolutionized that much. Maybe you would say like the A380 and things like that, and the Dreamliner, but really it hasn't changed over as much as what you would say the car industry, or like nowhere near as much as the computer industries and software industries, as you could see, like with the car industry, you would have like airbag technology, all these kind of things which are really focused upon the customer. Where you go to the airport, you've now got these more heightened scanners, bigger queues, things like that. It seems to just sort of gradually be a bit more of a hindrance than anything else. However, you've got things like online check-in. I always seem to be quite panicked in the sense that something's gone wrong with the check-in just before I arrive, and they say, "Oh, sorry, sir, something's gone wrong." But it's just interesting how all of these factors are going to change probably in the future. So, let me just explore these ideas. These are just little ideas that popped into my head as I've gone along. I think I've had a few of these ideas in the past, and I've held them for a long time. Probably a lot of people have thought about these things in the past, but there is some very, very big, large red herring involved with any of these theories, and it'll be interesting just to explore exactly why it would be a problem in itself. So, firstly, I would like to explore just inside the plane a little bit. So, how about a configuration of seating which would be sleeping? So, if you remember, if you've seen before, in Japan, there's like these hotel rooms which are just purely bunks, whereby you can just go inside this bunk and you can lay down, and there's a TV just like in your ceiling of your bunk, and that's pretty much your room. If you would have a sleeping plane designed on that configuration, I would imagine that the travel would be a lot more pleasurable in terms of you being able to get some sleep, being able to feel comfortable. You could always roll around, and whereby if you're in a chair all the time, you're a little bit stuck, and you're going to get like the pressure spots and all those kind of things happening. So a sleeper plane in that kind of configuration, maybe like the plane fuselage is a little bit narrower, but you could just have a gangway in the middle where people can just go in. Say like the beds are laid horizontally to the actual plane length, and they're all just in rows as bunks. That could be quite useful. And I don't know. Obviously, in the space on the safety specifications, you would need some kind of belt or harness if you were taking off and landing, and if you need to evacuate, you would need a decent system so that everyone doesn't necessarily trample on each other. Also, where would you put your hand luggage? But I guess you could put it in the booth with you. So, and also, I guess you've got some kind of private space as well, which would be quite nice, rather than just having to be elbow to elbow with somebody else. But I guess there is probably going to require a lot more space inside a sleeping plane in comparison to a chair plane. But if you think when you look above your head when you're sitting on a plane, there is still probably that little bit of a gap of space that never really gets quite utilized. And if you think of using the body as best as you could, probably laying down horizontally, like is going to give you the most efficiency. I know this is going to be a very weird thought, but if you think of like how a mortician sort of lays bodies in that kind of realm, when they're dead, you don't really think too much as to how people are comfortable, but just how more efficient people are laid out. So laying down configurations of planes would seem to be a little bit more advantageous, and I would be very interested in it myself. Okay, so this is a piece of technology which I've seen in the news and coming around, but I would imagine it's going to probably come around fairly soon. If you've seen this before, I've been in this situation all the time myself. When I've gone to the airport, the first thing I'm thinking, I really need to get some my mobile charged. It's probably like only on about 87%, but I'm just concerned that I'm going to lose that extra bit of charge when I'm on my stopover and things like that. So I'm always hunting around for a charging station, and then once I get there, I notice that there's one person there who's already charging up his mobile and his laptop at the same time, and then I'm just a bit frustrated, and then I'm walking around, and then I'll probably find somewhere that's right in the middle of the airport with no seats, and I've got to sit on the floor next to a billboard or something just to charge my mobile. So it's a little bit frustrating in that respect. So there is this new technology which is going to come about fairly soon, where mobiles can charge through the Wi-Fi. So imagine how amazing that would be. You not only get your Wi-Fi service, but you get a charging port at the same time, and you're not spending most of your joyous time in the airport trying to find charge and to really just shut down. So that's really that will be a revolution, I would say, in the airport, and it's like a massive hindrance. And I think I don't know. You go to some airports and they're almost charging you money to use the energy there. So it's a bit frustrating. I know obviously nothing comes for free, but I'm sure you're paying a lot of airport taxes when you when you buy airline tickets. So just to go one step further with the Wi-Fi thing as well, is whereby you do get these areas where you've got to find like some horrible place to sit down and charge your mobile or find Wi-Fi. Imagine if, I know that you do sort of have this already to a certain extent, but if you had a really luxurious Wi-Fi zone where you could pay a nominal fee, say, I don't know, $5 or $7 or whatever, where you could sit down, enjoy good Wi-Fi, there's a conveyor belt of food and drinks, and there's the massage chair that you have to pay for anyway, but that's already involved in it. That would be a lovely little scenario just to have. The Wi-Fi was ultra fast. It was all calibrated just to make people enjoy their Wi-Fi and sit down and communicate with people just before they embark on their flights. I guess that's sort of one of those glaringly obvious things that sort of spot to my mind, but really it's just the only things that you're finding around there is these like makeup shops and things like that, and the high retail, and then you've got your Burger Kings and McDonald's and things like that, but nothing really that's just thinking, okay, what does a customer really want? They want Wi-Fi, they want to communicate to their folks, and they want to do it in a bit of comfort rather than those big steel seats or in long rows. Next up, travel on your match. So this goes probably in the opposite direction of you being isolated on your little phone, playing on your Wi-Fi and stuff, but to the total opposite. You go into the airport and say you download say the Heathrow application, and there's probably like a number of people that are in the same sort of zone as you. You're traveling by yourself, but maybe you want to make some kind of social connection. There's maybe just different little groups, say like there's sport groups and stuff like that, which are coming on. So maybe there's a football match that's being played. So therefore there's just a social connection group to say, please join in this pub here if you would like to watch with other other commuters to see this sports game, and maybe you could extend that to matches beyond that. Maybe you could have singles connecting in airports. Like there is potentially some kind of matchmaking system that could happen in airports, which could help out people who are traveling alone. I guess if you've traveled alone before, you can always try your best to just go to the bar and then just have a drink and then speak to the barman and then probably somebody there and everything else. But there is a tad sensation of awkwardness at first. But if there was some kind of point in which you could have some kind of social connection beforehand, that would potentially improve the pleasurability of being inside an airport. Sorry, I probably am to and fro between aeroplanes and the airports. Next up would be private rooms for groups of people. So let me see where we're going with this one. So I guess if you where you go into these massive lobbyways and stuff like that, and I guess there are big parties of people that do travel, and there are rooms in which you can like there's all the luxury rooms that you can stay at before you travel, but maybe there should be just a little bit more of a private market in which you can buy certain rooms if you're a group of people that are traveling and things like that, so in which you can have catering for or drinks provided and things like that. If there was a bit more of a just a marketplace in which people can just purchase rooms to their requirements rather than just barandering around the airports continuously looking aimless, it would be I guess it would be a bit more beneficial. One thing that I would always like to mention is that where you ever get people that are arriving or coming back home to a country, you get a big like wad of people that are just all waiting with banners, welcome home and all that kind of stuff. It would be nice if there was some kind of way in which they could be like moved a little bit more inside the airport so that they can meet the person they haven't seen for a long time in a private room in which they can say hello and all that kind of stuff, and then they can take them home afterwards. So if there was that kind of leniency in which people could see each other a little bit earlier, have private rooms, have gatherings in their own special times and places, that would be fairly interesting. Next one would be speed travel. So I guess you do get this to a certain extent where you pay for business class tickets and things like that. You do probably get to pass queues and things like that a little bit quicker, but maybe just a ticket based upon purely speed travel would be quite interesting. So economy is still very high, but you really just want to travel very fast. So that airline is really up to just purely getting you through the checkpoints and security as fast as possible, and they are either paying the airports or anything else to just get that passenger through without any hindrance as much as possible for the lowest price as well. So I guess some people just see the airport as just a pain and a nuisance, and they just really want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So I would imagine a airline and maybe an airport which were really focused upon getting the traveller through and on the plane as quickly as possible. I know you do sort of get that with budget airlines, but there are things in which they have to work by the rules of governance of the securities and everything else. If there was a freer market in terms of how they could prioritize the travel, that would be fairly interesting. One of those nuisance things that I've noticed before on budget airlines is that you can pay to be the first person to go through the main border to the plane. However, that sometimes is just to the shuttle bus before the plane, and therefore it just really doesn't make much difference. And if anything, if you're the first person on the shuttle bus, you're going to probably be the last person off of it. Right, next up. All right, now we're going to really shoot into the future. I've probably bored you a little bit of things that you probably already quite realised before. Imagine this one. So as time progresses as drones get a little bit better, and as we could imagine that if we could have some kind of vessel which contains us, and then we could have a couple of drones, so these are just miniature helicopters which are very maneuverable to lift us up as being carriers, and then imagine having a plane in motion which probably decelerates for a little bit, and then these drone carriers can load the plane with people as it's in motion. So if you have this mechanism in which a plane is in motion and drones can load people while the plane is in motion, therefore you have cut out a massive load of time for the passengers. Incredible amounts of time for the passengers, in fact, and particularly because you're just going from the door to the plane rather than from the door to the I don't know, the transport system, then to the airport, then through the securities. All of those things can be done through a drone carrier that pretty much attaches you onto the plane, which the plane's already been pre-fueled and all those kind of things. You have had an incredible efficiency which has bypassed all the things of the airport itself. So you're literally obliterating the airport. The only thing that potentially would be required is obviously for the plane to fly up and fly down, but all you would really need for that is just the runway and the fueling station, and not anything of the necessity for all the shops and all of just all the other bureaucracies and other bits that you require with an airport just to sustain it. So that's the mention before. So taking off on a cruising plane. So next up would be safety. Now, I think this one's been mentioned before, but we've heard this one quite a lot of times where you hear all these stories of shootings and things like that in certain areas. People say that if you was in an area where there's gun carry, then there is less trouble. Now, I'm not even sure whether I would really be interested too much about this in myself, but imagine if there was a plane where people who had licensed gun carry could actually go on the plane and still carry their gun. It just obviously does heighten the scenario. I don't think that really would be that appealing for me, but I don't know if people who have got the license or have got a very highly qualified license to say that they are all comptus mentis in the head before they travel. But if you did have a number of those people that were on the plane, maybe the plane was configured that if it did have a gunshot to it, that it wouldn't decompress and be in danger of other people from having different scenarios happening. But I guess if you was on a plane where there was a lot of people who were qualified gun users and there wasn't a major problem with a bullet fired in the cabin, therefore, you probably would say that there is an incredibly low risk of a terrorist attack happening on that plane. Therefore, maybe you might think to yourself, well, I'll take my chances on a gun carry plane rather than I will take my chances on a non-gun carry plane where you could have different amounts of scenarios happening. So just an interesting point there. It's not really an exact theory that I'm getting upon, and I think we do still have a problem with cabin decompression and the plane just shooting down in velocity and in altitude and things like that. So it's just an interesting point, and I guess it could possibly be explored in the future. Okay. Next one is we got luggage. Now, I guess all clothes and items of clothes that you've bought and your body shape and things like that is really just can be labelled, categorised, and worked out. So where majority of people are travelling from one side to the other, you are really looking at a luggage case. You're just stuffing your suitcase full of stuff that you already possess, and then you're going to the other side of the world and bringing out all your stuff again. And now it is a bit of a nuisance, and all that luggage does cost money to haul from one side of the planet to the other. And really, if you could have something in which maybe this is probably like a good little business idea or something like that, whereby you could go to the your destination, and you literally just map out. Maybe even you do a 3D image scan of your body, so the computer or the software program knows exactly your body shape, size, and then potentially it knows a recording of all the clothes that you've bought or purchased in the past. What's your likes, what's your preferences. So rather than you travel around with a massive luggage case, the company actually provides your clothes, which are already installed into the hotel room that you're going to go into. Maybe it just says, okay, right, rather than you having your same old boring day-to-day clothes at home, maybe it could say, right, well, you're on holiday this time, so we're going to really just give you a bit more sporty clothes, give you a bit more high-class clothes, or something that's just going to cater for going out to opulent restaurants and things like that. So, and also it just gives you just sort of a breath of fresh air. You're not sort of stuck in your own world of wearing your own clothes. Somebody is potentially, or a computer is picking out some clothes for you. Some people don't like making decisions on what to wear and things like that. I know there are certain issues in which where you put some kind of clothes on and it doesn't really work to your tastes, but I guess a lot of people would be kind of interested in the gamble of which you could have a prerequisite of luggage that could be waiting for you in your hotel room when you arrive, and it could be fairly interesting to use those clothes. I guess where you're using clothes rentals, you're using somebody else's clothing, but I don't think that would really bother me too much as long as it was properly washed and everything. So maybe your pants and socks you probably wouldn't quite want to share with somebody else, but yeah, just an interesting theory. Probably a lot of people will just stick their noses up at it, but it does probably save on fuel costs and probably just nuisance costs in comparison to humans traveling around with a big load of luggage, and it's fairly nuisance getting it on board your trains and everything else, and it's a very nice experience to travel light. Okay, so turbulence, that's always a little bit of a scary thing. I remember one of my friends told me a story once where he went to the toilet and there was just this massive shock of turbulence where he literally felt like he was just lifted off his seat and then into the air and then back down again. And then he just grabbed himself up and pulled himself down the little way between the seats to find one of the air stewards in his seat, and she told him to find another seat. And then I think the other air stewards told her to get out of the seat. But yeah, it's strange story anyway. But if you could have, I don't think that in the realms of turbulence it has been really worked out too much. I guess you just have to get very powerful engines to sort of override the turbulence and just to withstand any kind of turbulence measures. Now, to my understanding, when you go through turbulence, you're just going through pockets of low pressure to high air pressure, and that gives you this little fall of altitude and things like that, and you're hitting different sort of pressure belts and stuff. So if there was a possible way to bring out maybe laser sensors or different kinds of like meteoritic sensors which are going out ahead of the plane, just to work out pressure, temperature, winds, and whenever it sees that there's going to be some kind of little impact to the plane, there could be just reflex adjustments to the engines or the flaps and things like that to negate any effects to the turbulence. Maybe that could be an interesting factor which could occur in terms of giving passengers a smoother ride and potentially increasing safety. Right. This one's just annoying in itself, where you have to write a boarding card before departure, or a boarding card before when you arrive. If there was nice companies that not government companies, I'm not a big proponent of government companies, but just generally good insurance companies which were I don't know, maybe if you wanted to, you could have it government regulated, which built a good solid database of your data that would not be shared with for malevolent reasons. So therefore you'd have some kind of chip pass to just identify yourself. Maybe it's attached to your passport, bought or something like that, but just build a database. When you buy a flight ticket, just work out where I'm going to and stuff like that. It's very frustrating just writing out your boarding card to say where you come from, where you're going to, and things like that, and what you've declared and stuff. It would be much better if you could build a database, maybe have an application on your phone, things like that, which would improve the standards. I mean, who in even the office world is using pen and paper to write out little statements and things like that? It's not been done for ages now. It should be really updated. This is going a little bit more in the realms of hedonism, but I think I've had this thought before. It's imagine if you could convert. This is probably maybe just for not very long flights, but imagine if you could turn a flight into a dance club. Now, I remember in the old days there was the flights which were like they had bars and people would drink and things like that, and it was a very social scene in itself. There isn't. I mean, by all worlds and standards, if you're going up on a plane, if you're on a boat or anything like that, you're still really regulated by the rules of people and things like that. It isn't really major harmful if you are drinking on a plane. I guess if there is some way that you could just get into the cockpit and knock forward the pilot's apparatus, then obviously there's a bit of danger there. But if you could ensure that there's still safety for the passengers, and you could put a disco ball in the middle of the plane, and you could all play some, and you had a good speaker system, why can't you really have a dance club as an aeroplane? I guess if there is any kind of added risks or any added problems that occur with having a plane like a dance club, then I guess you would have to factor that into just people's own risks taking themselves. I mean, a lot of people do risk activities. They do bungee jumping and things like that. If they're happy to go dancing in a plane in the sky, then I guess there isn't really too much you can say about it. If there was some kind of problem, or it did have to do a safety land, and all you had is these ropes that could attach to you from the floor, then and it does give you a lot of bumps and bruises, then I guess that's just the risk that people would take. But I guess a lot of people find it's a bit boring just to be stuck in a chair all the time. I've mentioned the sleeper plane, but let's go from the other realm to a full dance club. Okay, next up. So this one I think probably has been mentioned a few times in the past, but rather than reaching underneath your plane to find a purely just a life vest, which really there hasn't been many proven points in which a life vest would be required, because there's only probably been one proven time in which a plane has landed on water, the one that recently happened, I think, in New York. What about if we had parachute packs which were underneath our seats? I guess they're probably a lot more expensive than a life vest, but if the plane was about to, like the engines had burnt out and it was really going over land and things like that, and there was forests or whatever, or the terrain wasn't that great and there wasn't any good landing spots, then parachute packs would probably be very preferable for a lot of people, even if they hadn't been in one before. So yeah, if you could have an option where planes did have parachute packs and you could pay a premium to have a parachute pack with you, and if there was an option to say, okay, the pilot's just announced that we're going to have to make an emergency landing, people with their parachute packs, please go to the end of the plane, blah, 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 blah. I don't know exactly how on earth it would work, but it would be fairly interesting to see if people wanted those kind of safety options. Maybe where I mentioned before about little drone carriers, maybe that's probably the option for drone carriers in the future, to have little parachute options if the drone's motors burn out. But it would be interesting if you could have it for individual passengers on planes. All right, next up is, I guess this is probably one of those things that I've mentioned before about having private rooms and things like that, and meeting for social interests on planes themselves. But how about having a a meetup on a plane in where you could have social interests and interactions which are promoted. So one of the key factors is, imagine having seats which were facing inwards. Imagine if you could do your business conference inside the plane, so that therefore you don't have to do the meetings outside of the plane, and then you can do other things when you arrive there. Maybe the company could have all its big boardrooms and meetings inside the plane before it goes out to the actual factory floor of the company, just to work out what's going on the floor. It would be interesting if you could have more of an interactive floor plan of the planes itself, people facing other people rather than everyone facing one direction, which is forward. And if, I don't know, a science community of people were just all aboard a plane, it'd be fairly interesting. I'd love to enjoy that. That would be quite interesting just to hear everybody speak. But I think whereby you've got this, where you're all sitting on the plane, everyone's individuals, all sitting by themselves, all watching their own individual movies. It would be nice to connect up everybody and to know people's preferences and like things that they do and things like that, and have some kind of little social connection which goes on. Next one up is solar panel wings. So there are two massive panels which are sticking out of a plane either side, and probably the rooftop as well. And there is a massive requirement for energy from a plane. Plus, there is a lot of sunlight once you get airborne. So solar panel winds, obviously if you're doing night travel, then it doesn't really help out too much, would probably be quite beneficial. It might be good for running the just the internal lighting and just the normal power inside. Probably wouldn't be quite so good for propulsion, but it's just one of those potential energy savers. Maybe it's been worked out before, but you do see them on these like green planes and things like that. There's definitely options there. So to have solar panel wings would probably be very beneficial, particularly for daytime travel. Okay, so now, next one would be, this is just, I'm trying to be a little bit of a scientist here, but I'm sure anybody who's a bit more of a scientist can probably just smash apart these theories anyway. But imagine if, because obviously a plane has got a number of force points on the plane, just say the front of the plane or the wingspan and things like that, which is really just hitting basically like a brick wall. I guess you've got aerodynamics which are blowing off of it and giving it certain currents and wind and different things like that. But if you could have potentially wind power generators, so propellers which are spinning off the wind resistance, potentially that could give the plane a little bit more in terms of energy power, which is running into the main all the main sockets inside the plane. And I guess one of the main forces that I would always think of is where you're going downward force. You really don't really mind too much the wind force which is hitting you from below. So imagine if you could turn the below part as a turbine. Imagine if the wheel itself was twisted around so that could turn into a large turbine itself, and charge the inside of the plane. I guess there's some interesting points. Also, if you think if you could create a bit more of a box shape, if there was turbines like in place of I don't know, a larger hull and things like that. So just the theory of how turbines could be just angled and things like that could still provide a little bit of aerodynamics and a little bit of power generation, and maybe even give enough just for certain levels of propulsion as well. I don't think turbines are really used. There's probably some very, very good point as to which you don't have too many wind turbines on a plane just because of the aerodynamics and the amount of pull that it gives, but maybe a downward one, which I guess there's no real like big harm for a plane not to descend that quickly. So I just think that's just something that potentially could be explored. Next one would be, I guess, one of the interesting things is sales to harness wind speed. Now, I think I'm turning into Leonardo da Vinci with some of my ideas now of thinking how a plane could work. I'm sure, and we're turning into a plane into some kind of old medieval ship. But I guess there are things like flaps and very strong harnesses which can control things. But if there is an ability to harness wind speed in the air, like a sail ship itself, and just have some kind of high frequency adjustment, so you could have an elongated version of harnessing the power of the wind speed, it potentially could be quite beneficial. Now, I guess there's plenty of currents and things like that which you can't really foresee, and that's why there's major problems. But with what I've mentioned before, with a lot of advanced sensors and high frequency adjustments, maybe you could harness wind speed a little bit better. Okay, next one would be... okay, so I'm a big guy anyway, and I think this probably should be a requirement. So there is an extra fuel cost if you are a very large person. So if you are a very, very small, tiny person, you are going to cost a little bit less in terms of fuel in comparison to a very large person. And I believe it's really probably is quite fair that you should be correctly calculated the charge of how much fuel you use based upon your weight. If anything, that's probably an incentive for you to lose more weight. But I'm a big guy. I'm probably one of the heaviest. I'm probably definitely in the top 10% of the most heaviest people, I would say. And I would probably agree that it's probably just that I should pay a little bit more for the fuel, because I'm really using more of the fuel than everybody else, and it's really unfair for other passengers who are not using that. Now, you could say that I can't quite help it. There is certain things like my bone structure and DNA and things like that, but I think we have to get realistic that I have to pay for what I'm using. I have to pay for what I'm eating. So I think I really just have to pay for what fuel I'm using as well. And it's not like I'm totally losing out from my extra weight and strength. I do gain a lot of other things in comparison. So yeah, I think I should be paying more in comparison to my fuel. Now, I don't think it will be a massive change in the price of the ticket, because it's just purely the fuel. There is a lot of other added costs involved in your flight ticket, but definitely I would say that if you could have a calibration based upon your weight, then you should pay for what you use. Okay, next up. This one's fairly interesting. Now, imagine some kind of fusion. Now, I mentioned this one before in a previous podcast where I was a little kid. I noticed that you could create a hoverboard by putting two opposite end magnets together, and that creates a little floating device. That's zero friction, and therefore you can create a high-speed railway from that. And now you get all these Japanese super trains which are run now. But imagine if you did have a fusion of that, whereby you would have a high-speed train actually taking off from this railway and then flying from the actual railway itself. So I guess there would be a lot less of a cost involved. Rather than you burning off loads of fuel, you're just using electricity methods to take off. And I guess where you're using magnets, maybe there's probably a different way in which you could adjust for landing. So obviously where you're coming in for landing and you're just landing on the tarmac onto rubber, if you could use a configuration or a calibration of magnets to magnetize you into a certain zone, and then switch the direction of the magnets to just create a little bit of a buffer so you'd never actually crash land into the track itself. That could be a very interesting concept in which a plane could land on a magnetized rail track, and maybe that could be a future for the runway. And also, just another theory as well is if you could have the runway that just would direct upwards, so that you could have the ascent which was occurring as well, which is quite obviously an interesting thing. So the plane would obviously be ascending before it actually released itself off the tracks. And you do get that with ships, where at the end of the runway it does curve up a little bit. Okay, next up would be the cycles inside using people. Right, okay, so this is a bit of an old theory, and I'm still trying to get on the actual energy part, but you could convert the inside of the plane into some kind of gymnasium, whereby the cycles inside give power to the inside engines. So one of the interesting one is you could have everybody wired up to cycle machines, and those cycles could propel the power of the plane, and maybe that could be fairly interesting for just flying from one side of the city to the other and things like that. So it would be interesting if that could work with in comparison with solar energy and things like that, just to have a really ultra green thing which was improving the strength of human beings and the health and fitness, while being very green and good for the environment. So I guess everyone attaches to a cycle machine, and the cycle machine charges up the batteries inside the plane. Okay, so I mentioned before about Wi-Fi in the airports, but imagine if you had, I remember in Back to the Future, there's like this little sort of row of lights where when in Back to the Future Part 2, you go into this like highway which is on the, what on earth was that sound? A highway which was in the airspace, basically. But imagine if you could have those, I think they would just use as traffic lights sort of thing, or just lighting for the runways and stuff like that. But imagine if you could have Wi-Fi satellites charging aeroplanes in the air. So it was propulsion for mid-scale flight. These Wi-Fi satellites were charging from the sunlight or whatever other energy source that it was getting, but the planes, as soon as it's airborne and it was in a certain zone of the Wi-Fi, therefore the planes could just propel themselves from one place to the other without actually requiring any kind of refueling, and particularly using any sort of things like oil and like plane fuel and stuff like that, which is a little bit more harmful for the environment. So Wi-Fi charging satellite stations which were charging airplanes in the sky, I think that would be an incredible feat if that could occur. I guess the satellites would have to be in that, I can't remember what that zone is, where they're continuously falling, but they're not actually in orbit. So next up is re-augmenting flight travel based upon weather, direction, and effects of consumer demand. So imagine this one, where basically there was a database of people that would like to travel on a certain day, and there's wind directions, and maybe even the customers worked out how much they weighed and things like that. There could be some kind of economic sort of measure in which how much people want to pay for a ticket, what's their limits, what's their lowest, their bid price, their ask price. And it churns out this database and works out an algorithm of flights that it can find which are to the customer's preference. And then all of a sudden it says, okay, we've worked out this flight for you today. This is the best, most economical flight that we can find based upon wind direction and a number of other different weather effects, plus customer demand and people that are in your preference as well. So obviously, people just have to buy a flight in advance and really just work out what's going on in the fuel markets. But imagine if there was this very, very high-tech, efficient way of working out all the different constraints of the market, the demands and supplies which would occur to give you the best price ticket on that particular day. And I guess you'd have like the control people, flight controllers and stuff like that, being a little bit more investigating in terms of what could provide the best service to the customer. I guess another one would be insurance companies really insuring people in terms of how much risk people would like to take. So if people want to use aeroplanes without any kind of checks and stuff like that, people would have to pay for more insurance and things like that. And maybe even like if you'd have some very high danger, high regional areas, say from the Middle East or something like that, insurance companies would pay a higher danger fee in comparison to other places where you don't really get too much danger. So let's say Mongolia or something like that. So maybe you do from the Mongols, but yeah, I think they've gone. Well, the old armies have gone anyway. So I guess if you had insurance companies really calibrating to work out danger levels and things like that, that would be an interesting environment. Okay, another one would be, and this is probably a little bit risky, but just to say that imagine if there was positive discrimination based upon people for risk. Now, obviously, where you insure your car, young males are positively discriminated against because of their calculated risk. If there was a positive discrimination which occurred in terms of calibrating people's risk, but the more information that you provide to the insurance company, the less risk that it will probably be provided, because when you provide more information, there's probably less requirements of risk taking that's occurring. So provide as much information to your insurance companies, and they will probably give you a lesser premium to travel, and then therefore travel could be sped up based upon that insurance policy. Another one which is a bit crazy, but I think this possibly could work, is most travel goes from city to city, but if we could find a way to move all cities into a giant super city, then we would have no real reason to have these massive long haul flights. Now, I've actually mentioned beforehand in a previous podcast about it's like a logistics coin, whereby miners are trying to search out a better way to move companies side by side, and there is a financial benefit in reward from doing that. That could be an interesting component which could help and collaborate to create some kind of super city, and thus stop massive travel which would be required. Another one would be to recreate places of like beauty or places of interest inside of cities themselves. So you do get a Chinatown in most cities or major cities, but imagine if you could create a little micro London, a micro New York, micro Paris quarters inside cities, then there would be a little bit of a negating of you ever having to be there. Also, you can there is definitely an advancement in holographic technology. You could possibly do holographic pictures or images in the middle of cities where people want to really travel. So you could do some amazing Norwegian fjords in the middle of the city. And I guess it's not quite being there, feeling the chill in the air and feeling the cold water and stuff like that. But regardless of that fact, you could create places of natural beauty inside cities which people are yearning for all the time. Another one would be, this is going back to the luggage thing. Sorry, my theories are a bit sporadic here. Robots pack your bags with a video camera on top. I guess we're going into the George Orwellian sort of states here, but because one of the major problems with bag packing and stuff like that is that you have to really trust the people that nobody tampered with your bag and things like that. If you had robots which packed your bag and reviewed everything before you onboarded and things like that, then therefore you would have more efficient packing, and potentially you would have a more of a secure way of going past borders without worrying about whether you had drugs or anything like that on you. Next up would be, or anything illegal in general, flight tickets on the day in a buy and sell market. So say if you wanted to travel on the bus or the train on the day, you can do that quite simply, but you can't really do that too well in the flight space. So if there was more companies and businesses that were doing that, I think that would be fairly beneficial. Next up would be, we've got areas further inside passport. Yep, skip that one. Sorry about that one. And next one would be, I've mentioned this one a few times before, but rather than traveling itself. Why don't you just put on a virtual reality headset on, be on a treadmill, and then you could have your own self superimposed into the environment that you want to be by micro flying drones, which puts out your holographic image. So therefore you pretty much have teleported onto that space. You're just pretty much, other than I guess the sensory data from your skin isn't quite really there, but beyond that you're probably in a very comfortable environment anyway. You're not feeling too hot, you're not feeling too cold, and in theory you are sort of there from people that can see you and stuff like that. People can envisage that you're there in that space. The micro flying drones, which are putting out your holographic image and your sound and voice, will probably replicate that fairly well. So you are pretty much there, and that pretty much negates the necessity to travel in itself. I guess we've got the with the advent of webcam chats and things like that, you don't really have to do conferences and fly to different places nowadays. But imagine if you could do trips abroad through virtual reality sets on treadmills, and you flying around with drones and holographic images. It'd be very interesting, and you potentially could travel to a number of different places around the world. The only thing is obviously you can't quite enjoy the delights of food and things like that, which really is just the other parts of sensory data. But maybe there may be some kind of improvement in smell-o-vision and food tasting senses and things like that in the future, which we haven't quite worked out a way to replicate yet. Okay, next one is that modular planes. So I've mentioned before about the drones, which can carry humans on board to these super flying aeroplanes. But imagine if you could have the drones connecting to one drone, to another drone, to another drone, and they're all modular to create a certain aerodynamic design to lower fuel consumption and to be a bit faster. So all these drones could interconnect and create some kind of faster propulsion system and speed you along a lot quicker. Next one up would be to understand what dark matter is, synthesize it, and potentially create a propulsion system based upon pulling instead of push. Now, I've seen this in scientific movies and things like that. I always found it quite interesting that you could harness the power of gravity, but just in different directions and use different forces and stuff like that. It would be amazing to work out what really dark matter is and to find a propulsion system based around dark matter energy. Next up would be a magnetic lift. I've seen this one before as well, where you could shoot yourself up on a magnetic lift, like on a big pole, to a static space and let the Earth roll round itself. Therefore, I guess the Earth rolls round every 24 hours. So you pretty much can. That's pretty much the same speed of which a plane travels anyway. So all you really need is to get that magnetic lift to get up to outer space, and I don't think it's really that far anyway. You could I think if you was just driving upwards, you could get to outer space in a few hours and stuff. So it's just it's interesting how you could use the Earth's roll and just use the natural energy anyway just to get that going. I don't know exactly how many different problems that you would occur from having a magnetic lift, but I imagine this one is already being massively investigated by the scientific community. Just another mention as well is that where I mentioned about all these drones going into these different places, I'm talking about some kind of mothership, which is kind of interesting when you think about the motherships in terms of travel and things like that. Another one would be a modular plane. So imagine if you could create a plane which could modulate in comparison to the weather conditions. I think I've just thought about some kind of snake plane that can just sort of adapt itself through the sky, in which when different things happen, but that could be kind of interesting. I guess one other thing, I've mentioned this before about insurance, but you could have insurance policies which really could sort out after people with any kind of violent connections, like military, radical countries, extremists, and anybody that's really anti-humanity, with more controls. So yeah, all these different ideas for you, and just give you some food for thought. I guess we can also improve aeroplane food in some kind of way. I don't know how yet, but we'll find some kind of way to do that. Particularly when you run out of your own food and it comes to you and you haven't got the choice of chicken and beef, you've only got beef to choose from. But yeah, something to ponder on. If you've got any comments, thoughts, or more suggestions, I reckon there's plenty of suggestions that you can come out with in terms of aeroplanes. Yeah, put them below, and then we can continue the thoughts of how to revolutionize the aerospace, planes, airports environment. Thank you very much for your time.